Okay, our last but certainly not least chapter of Facing West. Sorry, I'm just neatening up my little area over here. Our last chapter is called Rapids, and this is chapter 6. The best farm in the country lies ahead, Pete said, on the other side of the Mount Hood. Ben looked at the huge peak. Notice how the author included Mount Hood here, so he's giving you a little detail as to something that was actually on the trail. Actually. We have to get the wagons over that? One man asked. It was only September 24th, and it was already the mountaintops all around us were white with snow. Mount Hood alone seemed to fill half of the sky. Nope, the trail ends down at the town in the Columbia River. You've got to make a choice there. You can raft your gear down the river, carry it for 3 weeks into the valley. Pete's voice went on, and Ben's mind stopped. The end of the Oregon Trail? The end of walking? The thirst? It seemed like the trail would go on forever. Both ways are dangerous, Pete was saying. Rafting your goods down the river or carrying them onto the trail is your choice. Winter is coming, so you'd better make up your minds. Quick thinking. Snoopy, hold on. This cat. Both ways are dangerous, Pete was saying. Rafting your goods down the river or carrying them down the trail, it's your choice. Winter's coming, so you'd better make up your minds. Quick thinking is always easy for Pa, Ben thought. He'd walked with the others back to the wagons. Pa's choice to come west had been sudden. It was right after the asthma had hit, and Pa had bought their wagons for the first time he saw it. So, what are we going to do? Raft to our farm or keep rolling? Ben asked. He helped his father put the oxygen in the harness. That's not what it says. He helped his father put the oxen in the harness. Sorry, a little distracted. Don't know, Pa said. Ben's arms dropped to his sides. Pa pushed his knee into Sam's side. Get over, you stupid thing, he said. The big ox had finally moved and the yoke fell into place. Pa glared at the team and shook his head. I knew for sure when we left home that I wanted to be a farmer. But now? If Pa didn't know, nobody did. You can't be thinking of going back, Ben said, and held his breath. All those miles? All those months? Wish we could, Pa mumbled. Ben stood, stunned. You came all this way for me and you're sorry? He couldn't bear it. For you? Whatever gave you that idea, Pa said. I wanted a farm. Or I thought I did. He picked up the whip. Sam snorted and shook his head. Pa whipped the oxen, and the team began pulling for the day. His face looked tired and sad. Ben let the team walk past. He let Mama and Amanda and Becky walk past. One last ride to the front, Bear Cub. Pete pulled up beside Ben. They rode silently along the trail. My kind of country, Ben once said. Ben nodded. They looked around the peak, at peak after peak, stretching as far as they could see. Riding around a bend, Ben looked down the broad river and caught his breath. The Columbia. Pete nodded. That town there is called the Dalles, he said. The end, Ben thought. The roar of the rapids rose to meet as they rode down the mountainside into the town. Why, Pete, you old fur thief, a man called out as they trotted down the main street. He was dressed like Pete, all leather and fur and fringe. You been out showing folks the elephant again? The mountain man bit off a huge wad of tobacco and chewed. Ooh. Almost everybody got to see the elephant this time, and it changed them plenty. Pete got off his horse. 14 died trying, though. How'd it happen this time? Them darn Indians. Pete's grin showed through the beard. Of course not. Then the grin died. Like always, we lost the ones that got clumsy with guns or animals or around water. Then there was the cholera. Ben pictured the graves along the way. Pete's friends spit into the river. I suppose you'll be heading back for another train? Nah, Pete said. Trail's getting too crowded for the likes of us, Jeb. I get the missing my mountains and my tribe. Notice how in the text the author makes the characters talk in ways that are appropriate for that time period in the 1840s. They didn't talk in ways that we would consider to be regular conversational talk, but they included a lot of language and a lot of dialogue that's appropriate for the time period of 1840. I had something else to say, but I forgot. It'll come to me while I'm reading. You going back then? Most likely buy you a drink. Pete spit again. You have to ask. The men wandered over into the saloon. Ben walked up and the swinging doors stopped. The sour smell of beer and perfume and burned stew made him wish the mountain air again. He stood in the mud of the Dallas main street. The buildings were all log cabins. Dozens of wagons lined the road. Chickens and pigs and people were everywhere. 3 boys about Ben's age came from the cabin that said dry goods. Howdy, newcomer, one said. I'm using a different camera today, not my laptop, so hopefully the sound is better on this camera and it's a little bit easier. I know it took me to the last chapter to figure it out, but we'll see. Howdy, newcomer, one said to Ben. A pair of women walked past. Both of them were wearing split skirts like Mama's. A girl about the size of Becky chased the hoop down the middle of the dirt road. Ben walked faster. Now he looked at every building in town. With all these people, Ben thought there was a house fresh with smell of new wood. Houses fresh with the smell of new wood. Houses like Pa could build, and stores. In his mind, Ben could already see them. A chemist for medicines, a blacksmith, a candle maker. Ben turned around when he reached the last log cabin at the edge of the town. He hurried toward the saloon again. He couldn't wait to get back in the wagons to tell his father that what he'd seen. There were no carpenters in the Dallas. Not yet, anyhow. Pete, Ben finally had to ask on the long way back up the trail, did I see the elephant? You don't know? Was Pete's answer. You faced down the biggest elephants in these parts. Ben looked up at the Mount Hood and wondered what Pete was talking about. He knew that he hadn't been attacked or starved. He hadn't caught the cholera like Amanda. He hadn't gotten a snake bite or fallen into a river. He could be proud of something if he didn't have the name. How could he be proud of something that he didn't have the name for it? Maybe Pete was talking about the desert and the awful thirst. It was going to be nice, Ben thought, to live where you could always hear rushing water. Pa, Ben yelled when they got back to the wagon train. Mama! He jumped off Pete's horse and ran in to join his family. September 24th, 1845. Ben wrote that evening, the last night on the trail. We finally made it to Oregon. That was in big letters. But we have a farm here. But we won't have a farm here after all. Pa sold or traded away his cows and the team and the seed and the plow this afternoon. Zach's father traded his tools for most of it. I want to pause here for a second because I left a comment on many of your journals that I said you need to bring it to some sort of conclusion. And the conclusion here, what you expect to hear the whole time in the book, is that he has his farm, everything is set, and they live on the West Coast now. But that's not what happens. They did arrive, but they still have so much more to set up that they're going to set here. So one of the comments I left in many of your writing is it doesn't have to come to a conclusion, but it needs to come to some sort of close, and this is what I'm talking about. Ben looked off into the darkness toward the sound of the rapids and smiled. Mama and Pa were gone down the Dalles. Pa had been whistling. By now they were buying wood to build a house. Pa would be as new as the town, as new as Oregon. He had made up his mind quickly after all. Amanda is sewing by the fire, Ben wrote. Becky is already asleep. I'm writing. That looked a little silly, but Ben left it. He looked back over the months of the journal pages. He laughed when he read the parts that were so hard that he thought life was back on the prairie last spring. They sounded like a stranger's words, but he'd never seen a mountain or a desert. He knew little then. He had hated writing back then, and it showed. It had gotten easier as they started drawing pictures. He found that one of the buffalo and one of the Sioux boys. He stopped at the sketch and graves of the 3 Cuthbert children. Ben read the quotes and copied from the book he had picked up and left behind again. He poked his finger on a cactus spine and had stuck it into a page to save. He squeezed out a drop of blood and let it drop beside his picture of a cactus. I wonder if I'll ever see the desert again, he said out loud. Why ever would you want to? Amanda didn't even look up from her sewing. In the space left on the page, Ben sketched the last picture of Pete, all fringes and beard and grin. It felt good to have a place to put down his thoughts now, to draw, to remember. He would never tell Zach that, of course, or Amanda. Finally, he wrote "The End" in fancy letters and snapped the journal shut. Ben said, looking into the fire, Zach was going on. Ben wasn't. He didn't want the adventure to be over. Ben thought about the boys that he had seen in the Dalles. One had even said, howdy. Maybe there were more adventures ahead after all. And there were plenty of empty pages left in this book. Ben opened the journal again and turned back into Pete's picture. He crossed out the end and neatly closed the book with a smile. Ben helped the men get Zach's family huge raft after the riverbank. Off the riverbank, Push, someone said. Push. What in tarnation you got on this boat? 2 farms, Ben said and grinned. The one that we didn't want and the one that Zach did. Finally, the raft slipped into the water. It dipped and leveled. Then it was off, pulled by the fast current. Ben raised his arm in the wave and stood panting. He felt his chest get tight and it didn't scare him anymore. Made himself relax, almost without thinking. Almost. And then Ben smiled. He knew the name of his elephant. So the name of... I just got goosebumps. The name of his elephant was... If you're thinking his asthma, you're right. Elephant, in this case, is a symbolic term for something really big that was a huge problem that the character had to overcome throughout their journey. And we've talked about this a lot as we've been drafting and revising. What is your character's struggle that they had to overcome throughout your journal entries? And hopefully you found one. If not, you're revising or editing it in. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the book. See ya.